everybody, to our June Spark Series event. We're so excited that you could join us today. And whether you're joining live as a live audience or later viewing us on YouTube, we're so excited to have you here. Spark Series is our educational initiative, and it's designed to strengthen Idaho's tech ecosystem, bringing you valuable information, allowing you to connect with some tech professionals across our state. We try to find a variety of panelists with each one. And today we're going to be talking about cyber and cybersecurity. We've had other topics in entrepreneurial startups and launch pads. And so super excited to jump into our panel today. We have three panelists joining us today, James McCarter, Steve Seidman, and Brady Harrison. And what I'd first like to do is to have each one of you introduce yourself a little bit, maybe tell us a little bit about your journey in technology and cyber, and definitely take a couple of minutes and kind of let us get to know you. And then we'll jump into some really great questions today. So James, let's kick it off to you.
Sure. So I'm the CEO and founder of Shadowscape. We're a Boise-based, intelligence-driven cybersecurity company. We specialize in intelligence-driven analytics, training, operational security for the most part, and have a cyber risk intelligence platform that we're about to launch. Going back further, I started this company about 6 years ago, got my start in cybersecurity about 15 years ago or so, where I was the director of cyber threat intelligence for a large managed security service provider. And going back even further, I was a young intelligence Marine and government contractor, which is where I started my career.
Thank you. Impressive. Steve, let's volley over to you.
Thanks. So I am one of the co-founders of a company called Assured Information Solutions. We provide general security, compliance, pen testing kinds of services. So we do a lot of consulting work, working with companies to help them implement good security programs and secure their information systems. I got started similarly to James. I got started in the military. I was an Army guy though, not a Marine. I did 4 years of that, and then went into government contracting and spent another several years working for various government agencies. Kind of moved out into the civilian world. So I've been in the cybersecurity business just generally since the late 1990s. So pushing 30 years of doing this stuff, and super excited to be here today.
Wow. I'm sure that you have really watched a lot come through evolution, right? With that many years. I'm always surprised when I hear like some things feel like a new topic, but then when I hear how long people have been working in cybersecurity, how long artificial intelligence when it was really first introduced. And it never ceases to amaze me that sometimes we don't realize how long things have actually, they're not actually that new. It's just that right now, they're such a hot topic, which is why it's a topic for today's discussion. Brady, let's hear a little bit about your story with Count, and maybe even just a little bit more about your professional career in general.
Great. I'm Brady Harrison. I'm the head of strategy and execution for Equifax's global fraud and identity business. We were part of an acquisition, Count, right, founded in Boise in 2007 out of Kinetics and as part of ClickBank. We, at the time, were a fraud and identity company primarily focused on payments fraud. Post-acquisition, we've focused on everything from account creations at banks all the way into payments fraud as well. So under our purview, we deal with a wide range of topics from Bank Secrecy Act compliance, payments fraud, scams. Increasingly, though, we're seeing the fraud and cybersecurity teams come together, as well as fraud and AML. So the silos appear to be breaking down, and now as part of Equifax, we're really at the nexus of that fraud, compliance, cybersecurity, and actual revenue generation for our customers.
Yeah, I can remember I was actually just at lunch with a couple of your colleagues recently, and we were talking about the evolution of Equifax, and I can remember my first job out of college. I was working in collections and doing skip tracing, and like the very pioneer of tracking down fraud. And it's amazing how things have changed. So let's really jump right into talking about cybersecurity and how it's become more complex, and how can companies design those threat strategies that are both intelligent and scalable. And Brady, let's go ahead and start with you.
So for us, we're seeing that things that cyber is doing, right? We primarily work with financial institutions, merchants. What we're seeing is kind of a little bit of friction between what cybersecurity is looking to accomplish in that best path experience. And in my view, it's really the key is dynamic friction, right? When can I place friction between me and this user versus like the risk scenario that I'm going to take? For us, our kind of primary entry into cybersecurity is really around user access management and reusable identity. So can we uncover information about that individual, like login or account creation, and then change the level of trust that we either give that account or treat that account? Common example, I am logging into my, portal at work. How can I protect that portal? Can I use some device information or a trusted device to maybe not do a full identity verification? And then depending on the sophistication, can you go to like a total passwordless zero trust where you authenticate every time, right? That's really the big shift that we're seeing for how do I build something scalable. It's not basic rules. It's either I have no rules and no policy and I just zero trust everything, or I use dynamic friction to decide how do I treat that interaction based on what I know about similar interactions, either from that user in the past or broadly. Most of the time that comes down to ML and AI.
Either of you want to jump in?
Well, what I would add to that is when to decide whether or not to apply friction is largely predicated on risk. And the risk is really contingent upon how big of an organization you have, what you do in revenue, the size, scope, and scale. So when you're a small business, you can apply, you can do probably some basic level things to get rid of 80% of the threats that are out there, basic endpoint protection, password management, multi-factor everything. So that takes care of most of your problems when you're small. As you get bigger, so the risk also scales. And when I say risk, I'm talking about a product of likelihood and impact. So your impact grows. So the small things that maybe would not be that big of a deal become a very big deal. And when you're, as big of a company as like a Walmart, every second you're down, costs hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars. So, your security becomes a lot more robust. And so when you talk about scalable security strategies, I think most companies would go, what's a security strategy? So it's one thing to be scalable, but it's another that I think a lot of companies jump in and say the more security stuff, the better, right? And we have kind of this idea at Shadowscape that security is not a shopping list, it is a strategy. And if you can't articulate what problems you're trying to solve by implementing these controls, security is kind of a catch-all term for a tolerable level of risk. And if you don't know what those risks are, then you don't really know what security is appropriate and where it's appropriate and where that friction that Brady was talking about is appropriate and things like that. And so it's really important to enumerate your attack surface, really get to understand what your entire environment looks like, and understand the threats that are likely to take advantage of that environment. And in that case, then you can start to decide what is the most strategic way to go about this to keep in balance our business operations with our, security that is going to apply a certain level of friction.
Yeah, I think, fundamentally, the area where I think we see the most gap is that most companies aren't really understanding their own risk or their risk tolerance. And they by default take risk positions without really thinking it through, right? And it can be very simple to get started on that process. I think a lot of people start looking at these, ideas of risk assessments or compliance processes or security strategy, and they start to, think I don't know how to do that. But if you just start by asking some very basic questions, you can make a lot of progress, right? So if you start with this idea of, what do I have that I need to protect? Right? What is that stuff? What are the systems that I have? What's the data that I have? What is it that I'm trying to protect? And then who am I trying to protect that from? Right? Who or what am I trying to protect that from? And that can really get you into that concept of identifying what's likely to happen, and if that does happen, what would that look like? How would that hurt? Would that cost us? What would be the outcomes of that? And then you can start really making those decisions, right? And so, I think it's easy to get intimidated by these concepts and start thinking, oh, I don't know anything about this. I don't know how to approach this. But I think it can be a simple place to start. And I would encourage everybody to think of this. If you aren't doing anything, then doing something is a good start. Right. And so starting to think about that risk, starting to think about those things. And we're doing this stuff all the time. But if you're not doing it in a conscious, intentional way, humans are very bad at actually gauging risk. We massively overestimate risk for things that are new to us, and we massively underestimate risk for things that we've done many times, right? And a good example of this is like every time you get in your car and you drive the same route, you're taking roughly the same risk. And the more times you drive that route successfully without a car accident, the more safe that particular drive feels, right? But realistically, the risk of that drive is about the same every time you drive it, right? The chance that somebody else is going to do something, or the chance that a mistake will be made, or whatever, right? It's always about the same, but your feeling about it changes, right? So if you drive a very sketchy part of a road, really narrow, really steep, whatever, it may seem kind of sketchy the first time you do it. It may seem very risky. You drive that section of road 100 times, it starts to feel very easy, very comfortable, very safe, right? And so human beings are just bad at risk management if we're not very intentional and very conscious about how we approach it.
So you bring up a really great.
I'd like to add one
ahead.
thing to that real quick.
Please.
If you don't mind. Because it's easy for us in security to understand what we mean by identifying risk. It's not enough to know that something is a risk. Like tornadoes are a risk, right? But it wouldn't make sense for me in Idaho to be building a tornado shelter because it's not that likely. When we talk about identifying risk, we're talking about prioritization, right? Because you can say that, oh, well, this could be a risk or that could be a risk. Yeah, they might be, but it's not whether it is a risk. It's a matter of where they stand relative to the other risks to determine what your highest priorities are. And that's what's so supremely important when determining where to focus your efforts in your cyber strategy.
We think of it as like expected value, like positive or negative, right? Like James is like, this is a risk. And you're like, okay, it's a 1% chance of happening. And then what happens in that 1% chance? You're like, well, we maybe lose access to our email for one day. You're like, okay, that's not that bad. And so then like a 10% risk, but it's existential to the business, that feels like number one priority. You're like, I'm $1 million business, 10% chance this happens. If that happens, business goes out of business. You're like, well, that's essentially that cost your business is like $100,000. And so you need to then mitigate versus there's a 99% chance of this happening, but the costs are really low. Your framework for addressing that risk should be pretty similar. We see this when we're working with folks on like, what is my cybersecurity strategy for like protecting accounts? And you're like, if you're a bank, you're expected, one is 100% going to happen. So now it's a triage. Well, what's my loss? I was like, well, I have a customer with $1 million in the bank. I wish I was that customer. you're like, I probably am willing to spend a lot of money to protect that $1 million account. Versus we deal with a lot of like fast casual, quick service restaurant customers. Those accounts are maybe worth, $50, $10. And so I'm not going to spend $20, $30 protecting an account that's only worth 10 to the attacker. And so then it's kind of like looking at what is the expected value of a fail case scenario. This happens, then what happens? How much does that cost me? And then setting like, hey, somebody breaks into a admin account of our marketing tool. You're like, how bad could this be? And then deciding how much friction you want to put on, that internal or external tool, I think is a helpful measuring stick, as long as you're realistic, right? You're like one into the other. It's not like everything leads to nuclear war, like through so many examples. You gotta stop sometimes, be like, hey, realistically getting into Brady's email would be bad, but it's probably not business continuity bad, embarrassing for me bad. Like, wow, he spends a lot of time looking at mountain biking stuff, but not like a huge business risk.
Right.
So is it fair to say that the cyber awareness is something we can't talk enough about? Is it fair to say that it's not a when, but it's not an if, but it's a when, and how am I going to handle it when it happens? And I think about, which is why these Spark series are so important, because the more that we can get the information out, which I love everything that you've already all three shared. So what are some of the blind spots too that you still see that companies are, I wouldn't necessarily say that their head is in the sand, but just that they're just thinking that, we're probably okay. Like, are there some specific areas that you feel that companies kind of still have as blind spots that maybe we could talk about a little bit of the importance of removing them as a blind spot?
For me, I would say incident responses. Most people are woefully underprepared for an event happening. And what I hear and I get really frustrated about sometimes is having customers or partners say, well, if it's going to happen, like it's going to happen anyway. And it drives me so crazy, because the whole point of incident response and preparing for those types of scenarios is damage control and minimizing the damage as much as possible. And so, I mean, what I would say to that is like, okay, well, getting in a car accident in your life is probably an inevitability as well. So should we not worry about seatbelts and airbags and roll cages and everything else? Why not put your teenage kid on a crotch rocket, right? Because it's all the same. It obviously isn't. And it's a naive take that, oh, well, it's going to happen. There's a difference between a hiccup and Brady getting embarrassed, right, by his email being compromised, and a complete business continuity interruption. So that's one that I think is huge. And then you mentioned user awareness. That's always a big one, and continually one of the biggest things that we deal with our customers. It'll never be a panacea, but it always has to be a central point of your cyber strategy, is to ensure, because it's just the easiest thing to approach, and misconfigurations and social engineering is so much easier with AI and everything. You need to keep your people on top of it. So, I think we do talk about it a lot, and it's not enough to talk about it. It's more, what are we doing about it in terms of our companies and our organizations?
Yeah, I think good points there, James. I think it's something like 70% of all breaches occur first with some sort of social engineering or some kind of human level compromise, right? It's
Right.
somebody fell for a bad link or a bad attachment or whatever it was that they did. And so I think that's, still, right, like this has been an ongoing problem for well over a decade, and it's still the easiest way in. Brady, you mentioned earlier sort of the dynamic aspects of managing trust with users and the zero trust model and things like that. And I think this is a big blind spot, is a lot of companies, especially smaller companies, but even sometimes medium-sized companies, are not doing a very good job of really understanding who's got access to what, and whether or not that access is appropriate. I think that's also kind of a big blind spot is, you know, you see this a lot, especially at smaller companies, is, you know, they've got, you know, 1 or 2 shared file storage systems and everybody in the whole company's got access to all that data, right? And then one person gets compromised and now the attacker has access to all of your company's data because everybody in your company has that access, right? And so these are things that I think are, you know, again, things to talk about more, right? Is not just that awareness of how could something happen to us, but also what are the, like, simple preventative things. I think, James, you kind of threw that out earlier, right? Like MFA, everything, access controls, right? Especially privileged access controls, who's got administrative rights to do things in your systems. You know, we've been talking about that in the security world for 15 or 20 years, right? You know, 5 or 6 very basic things that everybody should be doing, but that's one of them is separate things out by roles, by who needs to have access to what, limit that damage so that if somebody does get compromised, because that will happen. I mean, James, you mentioned like the AI tools, you know, in terms of like evolution of the attackers, like the 10 or 15 years ago, you could reliably say you can easily spot the phishing email if you pay attention to things like bad grammar, poor spelling, inappropriate headers or things like that. It was relatively easy to spot that stuff. You know, state of the art phishing attacks today, virtually undetectable by the human, right? And so you have to assume people are going to make mistakes. They're going to click the wrong link or get compromised by something. And so limiting the damage of that is the most important thing you could do.
In the same vein, you know, the security paradigm for a long time was if you have a biometric, then that's usually good enough, right? Now with generative AI tools, it only takes about 3 seconds of voice or sound to copy a human voice. And so I used to authenticate into my bank via my voice. That was an authentication option. I would be really worried about using voice authentication now. It's like consumer level tech, easy to find. Same with face, right? If you can, the biometric face scans are better, but looking for like just saying, oh, I saw their face on a Zoom call doesn't mean you actually talked to, you know, your CISO or your finance person. And so it's always going to come down to human judgment and then ultimately process. So we are seeing a lot, some business email compromise. There's a big case out of Hong Kong. Somebody gets a call from their team leader in finance. Hey, I need you to transfer these funds. And they're like, I don't know. Then they get an email from them. They're like, okay, let's join a Zoom call similar to this one. And they see their team and they hear voice confirmation from their team and their face on video. Hey, yeah, we want you to send this money. Turns out that was a highly sophisticated, you know, spear phishing attack against that individual. And if you don't have high quality process, you're really just leaning on hopefully good training to prevent, you know, thousands or millions of dollars of being spent on purchase orders or fund transfers. And that can happen at, you know, even small businesses still have, you know, plenty of funds flowing through their business, right? You're a, you know, agribusiness common in Idaho and you're buying seed or a new tractor and you want to make a one-time payment, right? You're sending tens, hundreds of thousands of dollars at a time that can be at issue. And if it's really just a, you know, an email signature send, you're putting yourself at significant risk, where before it's like the Nigerian prince. Now you're going to get an email from your boss that looks really good, sounds like them. You might get a phone, hey, I just got a new phone, so sorry, it's not the right phone number. We really need the seed delivered for planting next week. And so can you please transfer the funds today? That is ultimately going to come down to you can put all the security in the world on the edges, but it really comes down, as Steve and James are noting, most issues are people led. And so training, I think you just can't overemphasize that you will be targeted. Here's how you may be targeted. Have process, have an in-person conversation with somebody before doing something that seems abnormal.
I feel like all 3 of you mentioned AI in your answers. With AI and automations playing a large role in cybersecurity, what do you see as opportunities and risks? And when I think about that, yesterday I attended an event at Boise State, and it was pretty much a master class on crypto, Bitcoin, digital assets, and how things are just, to your point, Brady, money is just transferring at just faster rates than we've ever seen. And I think about, and I guess I really hadn't thought about AI and automations and cybersecurity, but I feel like that's what all three of you have kind of touched on a little bit.
Well,
Yeah, I think.
Oh, go ahead.
Sure. I think, I kind of mentioned the evolution of the tools a little bit, right? Where, AI has really created much better attack tools and allows the attackers to be much faster at it, right? So there are AI software development tools now. There are AI writing tools, AI tools that can fake video or fake phone calls, or all sorts of things like that. And so the attackers have a much bigger, broader tool set that can be very fast. It can be very adaptive. It can be very difficult for a human to know that they're interacting with an AI. And so I think that's, on the risks side of things, that's definitely, what we're seeing. But on the plus side, where those tools also are really helpful is, we can use those tools to also detect these kinds of things coming in, right? So if you look at something like emails that are coming in and need to be like scanned and filtered, we kind of use traditional technology still in a lot of cases where the email gets looked at, and there's an email header, which, who is this email coming from? Does the name on the email match with the address that it's being sent from? Is this on a list someplace of like known bad email vendors, or is the content of the email somehow weird? Does it have an attachment that seems strange? They do a virus scan against it, things like that, right? This is technology that's all, 15, 20 years old, right? And so being able to be a lot more dynamic and a lot faster about this stuff, to identify emerging trends, to have machine learning processes and AI level processes that are looking at, what are the threat actors doing right now? What are the topics of common attacks that are happening? Do we see that this email matches other emails that look like attack emails, things like that, right? So we can see that kind of evolution happening on the defense side. And then I think we can also see it on more of a how to help manage your prioritizations around things. So another example of like common 20+ year old technology that's still very much in use is like typical vulnerability scanners. So a business may be doing, let's say you need to be PCI compliant. So you're running internal vulnerability scans, you're running external vulnerability scans. These standard tools are, they work in the same way that they've worked for 20, 30 years, right? They scan your environment, they look at things, and then they give you back a list of everything that the scanner thought was not right. But there's no context awareness to that. There's no prioritization really of what's more important or not important, other than a scoring mechanism that's also sort of an outdated view of what vulnerabilities are the riskiest. So you could apply AI to that as well, and you could say, okay, well, let's look at what are the vulnerabilities that are commonly being exploited today. What are the chances that a given system, whether that system is directly exposed to the internet or not, does it have this kind of vulnerability on it? Is that vulnerability being broadly exploited today? If you can say yes to those three things, then all right, that's obviously the higher priority thing to go fix, right? Go fix that thing that's plugged into the internet that has an exploitable vulnerability that people are using right now, right? Go fix that. And that way you're not wasting time chasing some vulnerability on an internal system that's, maybe on purpose out of date. We see sometimes old legacy systems, or, I've got this lathe in my shop that, runs on this Windows 2000 software, and it's a $50,000 machine, and I don't want to spend the money to upgrade that. So I've got this old legacy system. Great, that's fine. Isolate that. Don't connect it to the internet. You can live with that, right? So, I think using the AI tools to have the context awareness to give you prioritization can really be a real like time saver and risk reducer.
Yeah, the only thing that I might add to that, like when we talk about risks and opportunities, when I think opportunity, I typically equate it with an advantage, and it's it's not that I necessarily have an advantage. I can analyze things faster now. I can make better predictions. Excuse me. I can multiply my forces, but that all applies to the adversary as well, right? So it's just necessary to stay on top of the threat landscape. And I look at the way we approach cyber actors is the same way that we approach kinetic actors, which is there's means, motive, and opportunity. And this is just how they leverage opportunity. So you just need to stay on top of that and understand that the nature of human beings are, one, they're adaptive, they're very adaptive, and they'll consistently be adaptive. Every time we make a change and improve our security controls, the adversary will think of a way, a new exploit. So that's what AI is doing right now, is it's just changing the game a little bit, and it democratizes a lot of access to different exploitative methods that were previously unavailable to what we call script kiddies. Now it's a lot easier for script kiddies and to do amazing social engineering and to buy commercial off the shelf exploits that were otherwise too technical for these folks. So but on the same token, as Steve said, it allows our defenders to move faster and everything as well. The only risks that I would add in terms of beyond what Steve already mentioned is it still can be a little bit of a black box. It can hallucinate. So the reasoning can be off sometimes, and it's more attack surface. It's more as you utilize it in your organization. Now it's something else that you need to be considering. How am I going to secure this AI as well, as it's got probably sensitive information? It can be poisoned as well, and on and on. So it's just kind of the new reality that we kind of live in, the AI versus AI cyberscape now.
To double click on that point, we're seeing more and more research around generative adversarial networks, or GANs, where you have a AI tool that's like your edge defense tool, like scanning emails. The bad actor used to like just send emails, and then some would work and some wouldn't, and maybe get caught in the spam filters. And then they would be manually maybe adjusting their send or flow rate, or using a tool to just like randomly change variables. With these generative adversarial networks, they'll actually make an attack, send an email, see what the response was. Oh, it got blocked. Or I couldn't do something on a web page, right? I try to click a link on their page and it gets blocked by some edge firewall protection. It'll say, well, what if I move the mouse a little differently, right? You see some things like a straight line path is like really rare for a human to do, but bots do it all the time. And so it will like move the mouse around. The point being is it's not just like AIs battling each other and they're just like bumping up against each other, unlearning. The threat actors AI will respond if they're using a GAN style approach to what you're doing. So it like slight variations on the attack. So maybe more or less errors, right? Different IP addresses or IP types, right? All the things that the AIs may be looking at, it will dynamically make adjustments rather than waiting for some human to like adjust their attack surface. And so it's really fighting with fire, and they're not, again, bumping up against each other unknowingly. They're like, oh, I'll make some slight adjustment. And if they're using a GAN style approach and you're using some kind of either hard-coded policies or a machine learning that's not learning or has some dynamism, you can really put yourself in a rough spot. The point being, as James, this is the world we live in, and that is how we're going to have to approach these things. We're like static, this is what our thing is going to be challenging unless you have some kind of responsiveness based on like what a norm or anomaly is that's happening, hundreds of times a second versus the speed at which you can put in a change request to your WAF.
Right.
I feel like that you're either on the offense or the defense, right? So, and it seems to me that just from those last three answers that as those that are serving in cybersecurity to be on the offense is that you have to constantly be innovating and scaling and keeping up with, like you said, it's not just AI fighting AI, but it's actually a moving target. And so what I'd love to do with our, like, we're going to do about a really quick, like some rapid fire questions to you. I love to leave best practices to those that are watching this, whether you're watching now or watching later in the recording, and then we'll open it up to visit with our attendees. But so I'm just going to give you a real quick question. Each of you go through a rapid round of answers, and I have like 4 questions I want to ask you. So the first one is biggest cybersecurity myth that you'd like to debunk?
I guess, yeah, okay. I would say that I'm too small to be compromised is a good myth. You're in scope. Like, threat actors it's targets of opportunity, right? They're always looking for the easiest targets. They're human beings. So you being small, and I hear people say, oh, well, my data's not going to matter to them. Well, it matters to you, and thus that's why it matters to them, and they know that. So you're not too small to be a target.
Good one.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think I hear that all the time. Another one that I commonly hear is, I'm not in a regulated industry, so I don't have to worry about regulatory compliance. If you are in any industry, you are in a regulated industry. So there's some kind of regulations that you need to be aware of. And there are many of those that involve cybersecurity processes, right? The FTC safeguard rule, or HIPAA, or PCI, or so if you deal in finance, if you deal with credit card payments, if you deal with retail, if you deal in healthcare, insurance, there's regulations around all that stuff. If you are a provider to somebody who is in one of those industries, you may have to comply with some of their stuff, right? Privacy rules are proliferating all over the place. All the different states are rolling out their own privacy rules. So yeah, if you don't think you have to comply with regulations in the technology space and the cybersecurity space, you absolutely do. You just probably don't know what those things are.
For me, it's friction in cybersecurity is the business of no, antithetical to making money, right? A high quality, intelligent approach to cybersecurity can actually save in the long run in terms of expected value from lost customers because of account takeover or other risk that they just totally lose trust in your business. Right? It's no one's fault when credit cards get compromised at that end merchant, right? That something happened, but it wasn't the bad actor. It wasn't the merchant whose cards got compromised. It was the bad actor who did so. But you will have negative feelings towards that entity. So in the long run, having a little bit more of a friction can actually be accretive to your overall business, especially if you do it intelligently. Like we talked about zero trust, and you make that process super secure but really easy. Like moving passwordless is, most people actually prefer if you go to a real zero trust passwordless, because you're like, oh, I don't have to change my password every 45 days. I just do a zero trust MFA every time I log in, and it's actually faster than the password process.
Oh, good advice. So on that note, we'll start with you, Brady. So going back to the myth that James said of I'm too small, what is one security tool or practice that every business, no matter how small, should adopt?
Oh, for me, it's not business, but every person should MFA or set up MFA for accounts over some specific value. If there is value behind that account to you that you're unwilling to lose, you really need to put MFA on. I'm sometimes blown away by the opportunities that MFA would present that merchants or businesses don't avail themselves, right? And yes, it can be somewhat cost prohibitive, but like Google Authenticator, right? No cost, right? Set it up on every tool that has it available. Like MFA resolves a lot of issues when it comes to some of the risks that you'll see.
Definitely. Another one I would throw out there is backups. Back up your data. I don't care how small you are. Back up your personal data. Like it's so easy now to back up everything. It's one thing that you get, a denial of service or some of your data is exfilled that's important to you. But the biggest thing for most people is I just need the data. It's, if somebody has it, yeah, that's bad, but losing all of that data is detrimental. And there's really no excuse for it at this point. And we run into people still that are like, oh yeah, we got hit, we didn't have any backups. And we're like, what? How this day and age do you not have backups?
Good advice. Steve.
Yeah, I think on top of those recommendations, I go back to a recommendation I made earlier, which has to do with access control, right? Who has access to what in your environment and what level of access they have. Even very small organizations can pay attention to this, and in fact, it's easier in smaller organizations. But yeah, periodically taking a look at the tools you're using, the services you're using, who's got access to those things, is that appropriate and accurate? You know, those are big steps. All those things are big steps.
So I'm gonna, because I want to give time for you to engage with our live attendees. Last question for you guys is, if someone is watching this and they know that they need to address cyber, they haven't had a conversation with anyone, they don't even know what their risks are, and each of you guys I do know serve a little bit different types of industries. What is the main companies that you currently serve? Like, what is the, in other words, like, what is a good fit? Like, is it that they should, so Steve, let's just start with you. Like, what are the type of like clients that you currently work with? What's a good place for someone to start? I know that each of you are in a little different, yeah. What's a good referral to you?
Yeah, so we work with lots of very small businesses. So most of our customers are 10 employees or fewer. And most of them are selling some kind of product or service. And the reason that they're engaging with us is, and this kind of goes back to something Brady said earlier about, cybersecurity being something that can actually be not just a no or a business hindrance, but actually a business enabler. If you're a small business and you want to sell to a larger business, that larger business wants to make sure that what you're doing is safe and secure. And they're going to make you do some stuff, answer a bunch of questions, implement security controls, things like that. 90% of what our company does every day is work with small businesses to get those kinds of controls in place, to get them maybe through a certification process or an audit process, so that they can go to those bigger businesses and say, we have these security controls in place, we have good practices in place. If you do business with us, we're not going to compromise you or your client's data, right? And I think that's, most businesses these days need to address that at some level. And that's, what we do day in, day out.
Great. James, thank you.
For us, we focus more on medium to larger size businesses because we do a lot of threat informed risk and continuous threat exposure management type work, and then utilizing our platform to financially quantify that cyber risk so that we can help prioritize where they need to be focusing. And so those are things that I think make it a lot more contextual to people that aren't really into, what all the nuances and technicalities of cybersecurity. When it's a financial figure, it becomes easier for them to stomach. And then we've spent a lot of our time focusing on CMMC compliance, which for folks that aren't in the know, CMMC is for all DoD contractors, that is a framework that is required now. And so we have a lot of people kind of panicking right now, reaching out and saying, hey, how do we take care of this? And so that's where we spend a large majority of our time at the moment.
Great. Thank you. Brady.
And for us, right, there's a lot of work that's really helpful to do on managing your own employees and managing their own access via like Active Directory, right, is a great place to start. We're really focused on having identity for your end consumer, so your business's customers, right? So if I'm logging into a bank or a crypto exchange or my hamburger account, right? That's where we generally play is, how do I secure and maintain my customers' accounts so that doesn't lead to financial loss for my business? So less pure play cybersecurity who's managing Active Directories, but we're starting to see fraud and identity have to talk more and more to cybersecurity because they're setting that web application firewall or they're setting the password reset or device policy. And so more and more often we're seeing it's not just fraud, cybersecurity, and AML and compliance. That's one big table that we're having to join in on for, how do I protect my consumers or customers' accounts while still having like the highest possible quality experience. That might be a zero trust login every time, device trust status, like, hey, this is Brady's normal device. We know that, so we're more comfortable with a login. But it doesn't just end there, right? Then it's about how do I prevent bad accounts from getting onboarded, right? So that's really where we're focused. So if you have end consumers, you're in the kind of B2C space, that's generally where we're playing the most often from a account protection and cybersecurity standpoint.
Awesome. So as you can see, as you're watching this video, if you have a need to work with Equifax, Shadowscape, Assured Information Systems, reach out to the Idaho Technology Council. They're all amazing members of the council. And I can't thank you guys enough for joining us today.
Thank you so much.